understand. Are you trying to say that Christianity, conservative, they're not the same?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. Let's go to that clip that I had with Michael Knowles.
Conservatives love to talk about true and false. Boom, owned, statistic, fact, debunked. Conservatives used to, at least, and to some degree still do, like to talk about morality and ethics, and you should do this and you shouldn't do that. In my lifetime, conservatives have just really ignored that third transcendental, beauty. Is it because beauty doesn't matter, or is it because conservatives are just missing something?
Okay, so yeah, so you see he's talking about beauty. Johnathan Pageau, I believe is his name, and he's saying conservatives don't talk about beauty. So then it's Christians do have an idea of beauty.
Yeah, they do actually.
And that's really interesting. Let's just continue with it.
Okay.
I think they're not only missing something, but I think they're also missing the key to their project, because beauty is that which draws you into truth and goodness. You know, it is the possibility of the world, let's say, being transparent to something transcendent, but we see that it's beauty that draws us in. And so the fact that conservatives have been focusing a lot on economics, on, let's say, family.
What's that?
Do you think he's actually saying that beauty itself is the actual transcendent of the three?
I think he's saying you have to have all of those.
Values, all this stuff. And ignoring beauty means that the other side has captured the world.
If I make a moral argument, a lot of people these days, when we're living in an age of materialism and moral ignorance and idiocy, if you don't mind the bluntness, that's probably not going to work very well either. They'll turn to the Big Lebowski argument. They'll say, well, that's just like your opinion, man.
Yeah,
who cares what morality is? But if I show someone a picture of a beautiful sunset, if I show someone a picture of the Sistine Chapel, the Duomo, or a beautiful mountain range, it kind of bypasses the reason. It kind of cuts right to the heart of someone. The power of beauty seems much more widely accessible.
Well, I'd have to agree with him. I mean,
yeah, definitely. It's just interesting that he's framing it in Christian versus like conservative. Because what is conservative, right? I mean, it's confusing. If it's not Christian, then what is conservative?
Yeah, that is a really good question, actually.
Well, let's go on.
Exactly. But it's also, I think, one of the issues we've had in the, let's say, the last few centuries is that there's been a movement, especially with the emphasis on reason. There's been a movement where beauty or the appearances are always seen as something which is tricking you, something which is lying, let's say. And sometimes that's true. And we see that a lot in advertisement, and you know, the modern media has a lot of that. But there's a manner also in which, because we believe that what the origin of truth and goodness, you know, is that which creates the world. It's that which makes the world. Therefore, the world is made in a way that reflects that, and that's beauty. That's that exactly. It's like that moment that cuts through everything, you know, where you're shaken in your body. You know, it's not just about up here. It's like your whole body participates. When you walk into a beautiful building, especially, you know, you feel overwhelmed with this sense of awe, right? These are things that are let's say, seizing people, and I think that we struggle with that, especially in North America, I would say. You know, we do have a kind of cult of ugliness, and also a cult of the banal is the best way to think about it.
Okay, well, I'd have to agree there. I mean, we've had the same dress for 30 years.
But from where is he speaking? From what standpoint is he speaking? Because he's like, he's a Christian, and he's saying that the Christian does have an idea of beauty, but conservative does not. American conservative does not. It's still, I'm still kind of confused. It's like he has some idea of Christianity as something sort of not mundane, but kind of a radical idea. Obviously, conservatives in America are Christian, so it's like he's talking about a different kind of idea of what Christian is. That's just That's what I'm gathering. But
We love things that are banal. We have the strip malls, we have, the electric wires, we have these huge highways. And so we've lost our sense of pattern. We've lost our sense of proportion. And because of that, I think our souls are impoverished for that.
I totally agree with your point. I was at a wedding in the south of France last year, and I'm walking through these medieval towns, and I remember I was even walking through Paris, and my wife said, "How come they get this? How come they get to have this, and we don't get to have these beautiful things?" So I totally agree. But why? Why do we, in particular, have this cult of ugliness in North America?
I think it's because North America is really the product of the modern world. It really is a modern country.
okay, that makes sense. So what he's saying is that the older Christian idea, sort of before modernity got really going, right, had an idea of beauty, but more recent forms apparently do not.
More modern.
Well, like more recent forms of Christianity. I mean, that's basically what he's saying. So
okay,
let's keep going.
It is founded on economic good, on economic progress, on business. These are the values that sustain us. And so, when we make these huge glass towers, that show power and economic success, but they lack a connection to the transcendent that the older buildings had. So I really think that's what it is. We are very practical. We make the best computers. We make the best stuff, but that also has a corollary. And there's also another aspect, which is that North American society in general has moved away from community as being, let's say, the thing that binds us together.
All right. So here he's actually placing conservatism and capitalism together, as in the free market, as in whatever's popular in the free market, therefore that's good or that's virtuous. But if you go too far with that, then it's like then it would be saying that conservatism doesn't have any objective standards for beauty, which is kind of weird.
Yeah.
But let's go.
We've basically planned our cities based on cars. And so that totally transforms the space. Traditional towns are hierarchical in the way that they're structured. So usually you'll have something like a church in the center. It's the highest building, the tower. Nothing is allowed to be higher than the church. And everything is aligned towards that church. So there's a sense in which the entire space, even the streets, the manner in which you walk through, has a human scale to it and has an orientation. And you think, well, why does that make it beautiful? But it's about orientation. If you orient yourself properly, then things will lay themselves out almost naturally.
Okay, well, what's interesting about Pageau is he's Canadian, so he's thinking more in terms of Quebec City, which is absolutely beautiful. I mean, in that particular sense he's talking about. But
it's built differently than...
Oh, very much so. It's like what he's discussing, which is the church is at the center, and then the town is organized around it. And there were parts of Montreal that were like that as well. I see what he's talking about, but I think there are some small towns here in the U.S. that have that same feel, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, maybe small towns, I suppose, but
you're saying none of the cities.
Pretty rarely at this point. Yeah.
I see what you're saying.
Right.
Yeah.
The idea of a medieval village isn't planned. It is this negotiation, this like organic negotiation of humans, oriented towards the same thing. Our modern suburbs are monsters. Like they're just these layouts of, houses and houses and houses with no center, no common project, nothing to bind us together. We're used to living in these inhuman spaces. And so because of it, we don't see beauty as a value that draws us together.
Here's where modern conservatives will push back too. Because you're right, I was walking around this town, Les Baux in Provence, and at the very tippy top of the town, there is the old church, and it's a beautiful church, and the whole rest of the town is kind of descending around that. But a modern American conservative might say, well, Well, I don't give a damn about that church. Who are you to tell me that I can't build a building bigger than that church? I'm going to build a skyscraper that's 10 zillion feet high, and I'm going to fill it up with a bunch of bankers, and I'm going to fill it up with a bunch of lawyers and a bunch of businesses, and we're going to just make money, money, money. And frankly, forget the office building for a second. If I want to build my house 10,000 feet high, I'm going to do that too, and you have no right to tell me otherwise.
Well, in the end, that might be true, and that might be fine in the sense that, okay, yeah, but then don't complain down the line when you see things falling apart. And so don't complain down the line when you realize that everybody is doing their own thing in terms of morality, everybody's doing their own things in terms of how they conceive of family, how they conceive.
So he almost sounds like a socialist or something, saying there should be like a dictator to decide what.
I don't think that's what he's really saying. I think what he's saying is that once you are properly oriented, it all falls into place.
Yeah, but how in the world would you get to that point where if everyone's deciding, well, how would you get to the point where one aesthetic idea or ideal is done, where because everybody in the capitalist system, they all wish like the other guy was saying, their own thing. Yeah.
Well, preference that's an example of the chaos that arises from orienting yourself to preference rather than orienting yourself to something that's understood,
an ideal,
universal. Okay, they when they had the church in the center like that, it was meant as this is the ideal. You are not yet there, but you can keep reaching for this.
Yeah, as opposed to like there's 12 churches and you choose which everybody chooses based on their own personal preference.
Yes.
Yeah. So the universal ideal, as opposed to if everybody chooses, then it won't be universal anymore. Obviously, it'll just be every individual has a different one. Yeah. So let's continue.
Of what is good. All these things come together. There's a reason why Plato has the 3 transcendentals. It's because they actually are, you could say something like they're actually transparent manifestations of something infinite. But you really need all 3 or else you can't have the other ones. Or you can fight for the other ones, but they're slowly going to disintegrate. I do have hope for something like a seed which is being planted. So the reality is that truth always wins. Sometimes it takes a while, sometimes it's painful. And so I think that for now, what we need to do is rather work locally, and try to plant seeds of the transcendentals, of beautiful things, work on our families, even our homes, like to just have a sense in which our homes are little sacred spaces. They have to be taken seriously. We can't just treat them as something to be used, let's say, but they are the place where we congregate, even in terms of setting the table, for example. That's a little example, but it's like in our house, we set the table every day for dinner. And it's a little ritual, but it's something which reminds us that, we're sitting together. We have to care for the place in which we're sitting. We have to treat it as if it's valuable. And these are little moments of beauty that can help work people up towards, understanding the importance of space, the importance of proportion.
Do people actually eat together anymore?
Well,
the families or people eat
but
family meals together at the same time, even, let alone have little customs to recognize beauty,
But I think that's what they're trying to discuss at the moment. That they're trying to say, let's see if we can. It isn't about going backwards. It's about asking ourselves questions about what actually matters in reality, and what's that ideal.
Human
it's that little bit of setting the table.
I think it was Christopher Alexander who said that every space that you are in will either slightly elevate or slightly lower your spirits.
All right.
Yeah,
that's kind of cool. I mean, it's interesting to hear it on a more or less, mainstream kind of talk. This idea that there's a single idea of beauty, and that's where you have beauty arise. If everyone does their own thing, which is sort of the American way, then you wouldn't have necessarily beauty arise. I think that's something people think, oh yeah, it just does. And well, you know,
Well, you
how
need
does
an
it do that?
objective standard of beauty. You can't just, turn
Yeah, you
around
need
and say,
that, but then you
my.
need something that's universal, something that
Right.
because how does it arise if everyone's doing their own thing?
Mhm.
How does beauty arise? And because you can't say no to something like you said, like the tall skyscrapers. I'm going to build a skyscraper for my home in the middle of the neighborhood or whatever. You're not going to have a beautiful neighborhood even if each person's home is beautiful in and of itself. Maybe they clash together, and they look terrible. You know, like if you remember those pictures of like Greece, where every house is like blue and white on the hillside. Every single house has that, and they have pictures of it, and it's so beautiful. But if you were to just like have everybody on that hillside just start building whatever,
or
it
painting.
would be ugly, and no one would ever paint that picture. No one would ever have that picture somewhere. But yeah, I always think of that. That's you do have to have some kind of larger than a single individual. A group of people have to decide on what looks good, or else you just end up with a mishmash of everything. But anyway, but yeah, I thought that was super interesting.